All right, so today we're diving deep into some seriously high-stakes diplomacy, folks.
Buckle up.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to want to buckle up for this one. We're going behind the scenes of this meeting between, well, then President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky. This
Ah,
was back in 2019.
fascinating meeting.
Oh, absolutely. And this isn't just like two world leaders having a casual chat over tea and crumpets, right? This is raw. This is a look at how the sausage gets made in international relations.
Yeah, you really see the personalities involved.
Yeah, the personalities, the power dynamics, all that stuff, all that's kind of bubbling beneath the surface. That right off the bat, you can just feel this tension. Trump brings up Putin almost like he's trying to poke Zelensky a little bit, see how he reacts.
See where he stands.
Yeah, exactly. Like, hey, so how much do you dislike this guy? But Zelensky, he doesn't take the bait. He pushes back, saying he's more aligned with, the bigger picture, what's best for the world, not just individual leaders.
You can see right there they have very different approaches to diplomacy. Trump's all about the personal connections, the deal making.
Yeah, like it's a business deal, right?
Exactly, like he's negotiating a real estate deal or something. And Zelensky's more focused on alliances and global interests.
Yeah, like he's playing chess on a much bigger board.
Precisely. And then the conversation takes this interesting turn. Trump starts comparing himself to Obama and Biden, right? Claims they were too soft on Putin.
And he brings up the javelins, right? Like that was his big
Oh, yeah, he keeps mentioning the javelins. For those who don't know, javelins are these anti-tank weapons.
Oh, okay. So like serious military hardware.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And giving them to Ukraine was a big deal. It was a very clear message of support from the U.S.
Like, hey, we got your back.
Exactly. We're here to help you defend yourself. And Trump definitely wanted to highlight that contrast, right? He's portraying himself as the strong leader who took action, unlike his predecessors.
But Zelensky doesn't just sit there and take it, right? He reminds Trump that this conflict didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It started way back in 2014 during Obama's time.
Right. Like, hello, this has been going on for a while.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And he even brings up that whole ceasefire agreement that Trump signed with Putin, which didn't exactly hold up for very long.
Yeah, that was a pretty short-lived ceasefire.
It's like he's subtly pointing out that this is a complicated situation with a long history, and it's not as simple as Trump's making it out to be.
He's grounding the conversation in reality, in the historical context.
Yeah, and then things get personal. Trump starts accusing Zelensky of being disrespectful, of like airing their dirty laundry in front of the American media.
Oh, yeah, that's where the power dynamics really come into play.
And he brings up Zelensky supposedly criticizing him during the 2020 election. Like, that's a pretty big no-no, right?
Oh, absolutely. For a foreign leader to publicly criticize a U.S. president, that's crossing a line. And you can tell it really gets under Trump's skin.
Oh, yeah, he does not like it. And then he throws out this line about Zelensky gambling with World War III.
That's classic brinkmanship, right? Like trying to escalate the situation to force Zelensky's hand.
Yeah, like, hey, do what I want, or the whole world might explode.
It's a risky tactic, but it gives you a peek into how Trump sees the world. It's all about power, about winning and losing.
And throughout the entire conversation, he keeps demanding Zelensky say thank you.
It's fascinating, right? In diplomacy, there's this whole dance of reciprocity, like you do something for me, I do something for you.
It's like he's saying that U.S. support isn't free. Zelensky needs to be grateful.
Yeah, it's almost like he's expecting Zelensky to pledge allegiance or something.
And the meeting ends with Trump pushing for some kind of deal, basically saying if the U.S. pulls out, Ukraine's on its own.
That's a pretty heavy message to leave on.
Yeah, no kidding. Do what I say or you're screwed.
Yikes.
It's a power move, pure and simple.
So we've got personal grudges, power plays, threats of global war. And this was just the first part of the conversation. I know, right? And it only gets more intense from here.
Yeah, folks, you're not going to want to miss the rest of this deep dive. We'll be right back after the break.
All right, welcome back.
Back into the thick of it.
Yeah, so remember all that tension we were talking about and the clash of personalities.
Oh yeah, like a heavyweight title fight.
Exactly. Well, let's think about what this meeting means, for the US and Ukraine long term.
Long-term impact, yeah, that's a good point.
It's like throwing a stone into a pond,
Yeah.
right? You get the initial splash, but then those ripples, they just keep spreading out.
And they can go pretty far.
Exactly. And in this case, those ripples go way beyond just the two countries involved. We're talking about, global power dynamics, trust in those big international institutions.
Like the UN and all that.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, the potential for, escalating the conflict.
Okay, so a lot to unpack there.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So let's focus on the U.S. and Ukraine for a minute. Like, how did this whole interaction shape their relationship?
Well, I mean, let's be honest, it definitely didn't help things. Zelensky was clearly trying to, like, assert Ukraine's independence, push back against Trump's pressure tactics.
Which were pretty intense.
Oh, yeah. But at the same time, he knew Ukraine needed help, right? They needed U.S. support.
It's like that saying, stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, exactly. You need help, but you don't want to be bullied into submission.
And this was all happening while the 2020 election was brewing back in the U.S., right?
Oh, absolutely. And that adds a whole other layer to this, because Trump pushing Zelensky to investigate the Bidens, that became a huge scandal.
Yeah, I remember that.
It raised all these questions about, was Trump putting his own political interests ahead of the country's?
Abusing his power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it led to his first impeachment, remember?
So this wasn't just two guys disagreeing. It had, like, real consequences.
Oh, absolutely. Big
Yeah.
consequences. And we're still seeing those ripples today.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, it created this atmosphere of distrust between the two countries. Zelensky was trying to maintain a good relationship, but he also saw how Trump's actions could hurt Ukraine.
Like damage their long-term interests.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like with friends like these, who needs enemies?
Right.
Right.
And that distrust, it has lingered. It makes it harder for them to work together, even now on important things like security and defense.
So zooming out a bit, like, how did this meeting affect the way other countries see the U.S.?
It definitely hurt the U.S.'s image. A lot of people saw Trump's behavior as, arrogant, undiplomatic.
Like the stereotypical ugly American.
Yeah, kind of. It reinforced this idea that the U.S. just throws its weight around to get what it wants.
Doesn't care about anyone else.
Yeah, and that can backfire, right? If other countries see the U.S. as a bully, they're less likely to trust us, to want to cooperate.
They might even start looking for other alliances.
Exactly. And that's something we're seeing now, right? With China and Russia trying to, challenge the U.S. on the world stage.
So this meeting was kind of like a warning sign.
Yeah, you could say that. It showed that the global order, that whole system, it's not as stable as we might think. There are these cracks, these tensions, and they're not going away.
Okay, so lots of big picture stuff there.
Yeah, a lot to think about.
Maybe we could, like, zoom back in for a minute, look at some specific moments in the meeting that really jumped out at you.
Yeah, let's analyze the language a bit, see what we can learn.
Okay, what phrases really struck you?
Well, that part where Trump says, you're gambling with World War III, that was pretty intense.
Oh, yeah, even for Trump, that's pretty extreme.
Right. Like, he's trying to scare Zelensky into submission. It's classic Trump, using that hyperbole, that exaggeration to try and control the conversation.
To make himself seem like the only adult in the room.
Exactly. And remember all those thank you demands? That was interesting.
Yeah, that was weird.
Well, think about it this way. In diplomacy, there's this unspoken rule of reciprocity, right? You help me, I help you. Trump was basically saying that U.S. support wasn't free.
Like Zelensky owed him something.
Exactly. It was a power play. And it's interesting to contrast that with Zelensky's language. He was much more measured, more diplomatic.
Like he was trying to be careful not to provoke Trump.
Yeah, he was walking a tightrope.
There's that line where Zelensky talks about, like, the U.S. having a nice ocean but warns that they'll feel it in the future. What was that about?
I think he was trying to subtly warn Trump, like, don't think you're safe just because you're far away.
Like, what happens over here can still affect you over there.
Right. He was acknowledging the U.S.'s isolation, but also saying that they're not immune to what's happening in the world.
Like conflicts have a way of spreading.
Exactly. And that ties back to what we were talking about earlier about how everything's connected.
Global interconnectedness.
Yeah. This meeting, it wasn't just about Trump and Zelensky. It was about this whole web of relationships and power dynamics that shape the world.
This one conversation was like a microcosm of everything.
Exactly. And it shows how quickly things can escalate, how misunderstandings can happen.
Okay, so to understand the present, we got to look to the past.
Right. Historical context is crucial.
How does this meeting fit into the bigger picture of U.S.-Ukraine relations?
Well, you have to remember that Ukraine has this long, complicated history with Russia, right? They were part of the Soviet Union for decades.
And even after they became independent in '91, they were still closely tied to Russia.
Economically, culturally, all of that.
But there were a lot of tensions, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And things really escalated in 2014 when Russia invaded and annexed Crimea.
That was a big deal.
Oh, huge. It showed that Russia was willing to use force to get what it wanted in the region.
And that marked the beginning of the conflict in eastern Ukraine, right?
Yeah, with the Russian-backed separatists fighting against the government.
So this meeting with Trump and Zelensky It was happening against the backdrop of this active conflict.
Exactly. And that's really important to keep in mind. Zelensky was desperate for U.S. support, while Trump seemed to see the whole situation as a way to, advance his own agenda.
It's kind of sad that all this suffering in Ukraine got caught up in U.S. politics.
It is. And it made finding a peaceful solution that much harder.
It's a reminder that we're not just talking about abstract ideas here.
Yeah.
Real people's lives are at stake.
Absolutely. And as we move into the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore those consequences even further. We'll talk about what this meeting means for the future of U.S.-Ukraine relations for the global order as a whole.
All right, so we're back. And I got to say, this deep dive into the Trump's-Zelensky meeting has been intense.
It's been a wild ride for sure.
Yeah, from Putin to javelins to, threats of World War III. Diplomacy is not for the faint of heart, that's for sure.
Definitely not. It's rarely polite or straightforward,
No kidding. So as we wrap things up here, what are the big takeaways? What should our listeners be thinking about as they, go about their day?
I think the main thing is that diplomacy is complicated. It's not just about, signing treaties and shaking hands. There's so much going on beneath the surface.
Like all those personal relationships and political calculations we were talking about.
Exactly. And in this case, Trump came in with a very specific worldview, right? He values loyalty, he's skeptical of alliances, and he sees everything as a transaction.
A business deal.
Yeah, and that had a big impact on how he approached this meeting with Zelensky.
And arguably on everything that happened afterward.
For sure. It makes you realize how much power individuals have in shaping global events.
Right, like the decisions of one person can have ripple effects that touch everyone.
Exactly. So where does this leave us? What does this whole meeting tell us about the U.S. and Ukraine going forward?
Yeah, and about the world in general.
Well, it definitely exposed some cracks in the relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine. It highlighted the power imbalance, the different priorities, and, the potential for misunderstandings.
And those cracks are still there.
Yeah.
Right? Especially with everything that's been happening in Ukraine recently.
Yeah, unfortunately. The past few years have shown us how fragile peace can be and how important it is to have clear communication and a commitment to finding peaceful solutions.
It can be kind of overwhelming to think about all this stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot.
But I think it's also empowering to be informed, to understand how the world works, even the messy parts.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, as they say.
Right. So to wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a question.
Okay, I like it.
Imagine you're Zelensky, sitting across from Trump in that room. How would you handle that situation? How would you balance the need for U.S. support with, the desire to stand up for Ukraine's interests?
That's a tough one. There's no easy answer.
Nope. But it's a question worth thinking about. It makes you appreciate the challenges that leaders face and the weight of the decisions they have to make.
It reminds us that diplomacy is a constant balancing act, a delicate dance between cooperation and competition.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the complexities of international relations and the never-ending search for peace in our often chaotic world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.